Welcome to episode 317 of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Morgan, aka Baun Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about my 2024 Game of the Year and 9 more, airing my Gamer Grievances 2024 edition, and much more. Before we get started, subscribe to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, or subscribe to the Baun Diesel YouTube channel and get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, check out the links in the show description. Let's jump into that gaming news, and we're going to hit up the main story this week. It is going to be my 2024 Game of the Year plus 9 others. I'm going to start from 10, talk about everything. Before we jump into this, please, for the love of all that's good, remember, these are just my favorite games this year. I didn't play every game that came out this year. I don't have a Switch. I don't have a PlayStation 5. So I missed a bunch of those. There's even some real popular third parties I either didn't play or didn't get into. We can talk about some of those at the end. Let's jump into it. Number 10, to start this off and make everyone mad, is the Starfield Shattered Space DLC. I had pretty low expectations for this, to be honest. If you pay attention to my content, you will know that I really like Starfield a lot. I've got multiple hundreds of hours in it already, and it I think it's better than it's gotten credit for. There is probably at some point a whole Xbox tax discussion to have. I've always been pretty against the whole idea and the conspiracy of something like that. I may be coming around a little more to it though, but it's a bigger discussion to have another day. But Starfield, I think, is a very good game. I'm not going to say it's a GOAT. It's not the greatest game of all time. It's very person to person as well. I love Starfield, and so I really like this DLC. Is it basically just more Starfield? Yes. So as someone who likes Starfield, that was perfectly fine with me. It obviously wasn't going to be it wasn't going to be content that was going to bring people out of the cold, right? If you didn't like Starfield already, this wasn't going to make you like Starfield. I thought the story was good. I thought the environment was really good. I thought the new enemies and stuff like that were great. But it still has some of the same issues that the base game has. The fact that it is a Bethesda game, right? As much as we wish Bethesda has taken bigger steps into modernizing their games, they haven't. And Starfield's a pretty good example of how they're still resting on their laurels in a lot of ways. That said, I still don't think Starfield in general, and this DLC as well, gets credit for the things that they have modernized, and how just things like the game looks really good. Obviously, there's areas in the graphical side of things that it's very aged and doesn't look as great. Their animation systems aren't the best. Their facial capture, and because I don't think they use it. I don't think the characters do facial capture for animations and stuff like that. And it's stiff. It doesn't look great. But then you look at a sandwich, and it's the most photorealistic thing I've ever seen in a game. Or the aesthetic of the ships and some of the environments, not all, and some of the buildings, not all, things like that. That's what it comes down to. A lot of the particle effects are really pretty, all that. Starfield, good game, good DLC. I think I settled in at a 7.5 or 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed the story. I liked where it went. I wish I would have taken my time with it a little more. But yeah, it earned, if we're nominating, if we're letting DLC win for other award shows, I'm gonna let a DLC get number 10 for me here. Number 9 for me this year was EA Sports College Football 25. Now, this to me was kind of a like a nostalgia play to a point. I played, I've played probably a half dozen or probably closer to 10 of the various NCAA football games that came out over the years. And then they didn't come out since 2015. And then they did this one, the first one in 10 years. NCAA football 2006 is probably one of my most played games ever. I don't have my PS2 anymore. I doubt they even tracked hours back then. But I played that game too much. And so there's a lot of nostalgia here. This game comes out not perfect, but all things considered, because this is in many ways a new game where their previous games have been iterative. This and to throw it out there, this College Football 25, from my knowledge and from what I've played, definitely didn't just seem like Madden with college teams. They did add a lot of other stuff. Now, obviously, that's probably still the base architecture of the game, and there's definitely places where it feels like that. But overall, I had a lot of fun with this. More so doing the Road to Glory kind of mode they have, where you start off as a freshman and you have to do all these tests and see how high level of a college you can get recruited to, or you can start off at a small college, and if you do well enough, you can transfer to the big schools and all that. It's a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. It's kind of like a little RPG inside a sports game. The Dynasty mode is like that too, where you like role play as a coach. And you start off at a small school, you build them up, you get them better, you get offers from bigger schools, you move up, you do recruiting, and you do development of your players and all that stuff. And it's a lot of fun. EA Sports College Football 25 gets my number 9 spot, just because I had a good time with it this year. Number 8 is going to be Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. I haven't finished this game, just throwing it out there, being very clear. I believe I'm about halfway through. I do need to go back to it. But this game just has it all, man. Like, it's just a good experience. It looks good. It's got a nice... the comparison has been that it feels very much like an Xbox 360 game. And not in the sense of it looks bad. It doesn't. It looks amazing. It looks as good as anything else that came out this year. And I'm not a big 40K guy. Since I played this, I've actually gotten more into it, and I've been learning more about the lore and stuff like that. But it just throws you in. You don't need to play the previous games. You don't really need to know much about Warhammer to enjoy it. I definitely didn't, and I did. But you are this genetically modified tank, this human in a tank suit who's walking around, blowing everything up, ripping things apart. It just feels really good. Has a really good parry system. Lots of little systems. Reload. All of that stuff. It feels great. It's a lot of fun to play. It looks really good. From the story I've played so far, was very compelling. Yeah. If you just want a nice, simple experience, kind of a throwback in a lot of ways, Warhammer 40K Space Marine 2, definitely do it, especially because I have to imagine here in the short term there's going to be big discounts. It's been out for a little bit. Definitely check it out, even just to kind of see how pretty a game can be today. Number 7, Pokemon TCG Pocket. This is a mobile game that I have played way more hours of this year than I am proud of. So it's a mobile game. The whole idea is every so many hours you get to open packets, and there's monetization and all of the stuff that you expect. The base of the game, I would argue, is a card collecting game, just like Pokemon, the card game, the real life version. But it does have the elements of PvE and PvP battling, which I've never actually done, even though back in middle school, I literally had a whole book full of Pokemon cards. I never once actually played a game of Pokemon, like actually competed or use them correctly. I just liked the way they looked. And I had a lot of them, and I don't even want to talk about the ones I know I have, and I've looked at the websites, and I know I kept them in little sleeves and kept them in a big book. And I've looked and seen how much some of them are worth, like some like OG, like Charizard holographics and stuff, uh, and Mewtwo, like, in knowing that my dad, I'm pretty sure either sold or gave them away at a yard sale when I was in college, I think. I don't think about it too much. I just moved on. Um, but this definitely brings back some of that fun of like, oh man, like this is cool. It's something I can spend an hour on a day, if that, often less. And it gives you that little dopamine rush. It feels good. Maybe I've spent a few bucks here and there to be able to open up 10 packs at once is, man, they really nailed that. It feels really good. They definitely have been pulling in people, pulling in their money. So good for them. The PvP is very meta centric. For the most part, people are running like the one set, if they have the cards at least, that just dominates and destroys everybody, and that's just the way it goes. Luckily, that balance seems to change over time, and people find counters and things like that. But it's not the most competitive or balanced experience, but I still do enjoy it. But yeah, I've never played a mobile game with any seriousness more than 20 minutes. So because of how much I've played this, I had to put it on here. So number 7 is Pokemon TCG Pocket. Number 6 is Call of Duty Black Ops 6. There's a caveat here. This would probably be higher just from the single player. The single player story, it's about, I think, the typical length, 10 or 15 hours. Has great characters, great writing, really fun missions, great set pieces, looks really good, very beautiful. It's just fun. Great single player. They threw in some new stuff into it. They implemented some stuff that I didn't expect. That was there's one level in particular, a little past the halfway mark, maybe a little later in that. Super cool, very stressful, but really enjoyed the way they implemented it. Really, really cool. Multiplayer Warzone, not really my thing. I've just never gotten into Warzone. I did play some DMZ in the last, when that was available. Was that Modern Warfare 2, I think, or 3? I liked it. It just is just like Baby Tarkov, basically, and it was not really in the best way. And then the multiplayer for Black Ops 6, I played a couple rounds, and I just got dominated so hard. I'm sure if I kept playing and I learned the maps and I got into the flow and I understood things better, I'm sure it would have been okay. But it just left such a bad first impression because I'm getting old. I'm not as good as these things as I once was, even though I'm not really that old. I'm only 36. I just that if I enjoyed the multiplayer more, this would probably be higher for me. But this still isn't a bad thing. Number 6 for Black Ops 6 for me in 2024 is not too bad. Then we move to the top 5. So with number 5, we have Helldivers 2. I'm surprised I actually have this on here a little bit, and it's mostly because of this most recent the Illuminati update they did. That kept me from having this probably at the bottom of the list. Because Helldivers 2 is just fun. It's silly, it's self-referential, it's got lots of wink and nod moments. It does those things extremely well. And that's really, really cool. I don't think they've supported the game very well. This Illuminati update they did, they've been hinting to that since I stopped playing back in May. So, or April, I think even. I believe I have 50 or 60 hours into the game. And so like when they kept doing that and then not revealing it because they didn't for another 6 months, when they did some weird balancing stuff that people really didn't like, they did some stupid stuff with how they required a PlayStation account at one point, then they pulled that back. It For me, it was hard because I play solo, and so I matchmake, and I think that takes away from the experience. It seems like the people who have like played like hundreds of hours who have no life debt or max level, all that, unlocked everything, are people who play with like a set group of people or a loose group of people, right? Someone like me, mostly playing with solos or playing solo with other groups. It has a great ping system. It's very doable. It's extremely doable. It's great. But it's just not the same, and it does get old and repetitive. You can only play on the same maps, killing the same enemies, doing the same thing so much. I kind of level capped. I know there's people running like level 10 hell diving, excursions and doing all that stuff. I cap out around like 5 or 6. After that, it's not really fun for me because I'm playing solo with random matchmaking groups. I'm sure if I had a set group of people, I'd probably get into the higher level stuff. It would have had more legs for me. It just didn't, and that's fine. It's still my 5th favorite game of 2024, which for me was a great year, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But Helldivers 2, good fun. In the technical side, knowing they're making it on this like extinct engine that no one uses, and it was like made for like not gaming purposes, or I forget what the exact story is off the top of my head, but I know it's a miracle that this game works at all on the engine it's on, and that it legitimately it has a really good style. I don't know if you zoom way in on all the textures and stuff. I don't know how great it looks, but it doesn't matter because they're like art design, and the way that they handled that stuff is just so top tier that it's definitely a like substance over style thing. I think where they just they knew what they were going for, and they've done that pretty well, and that's why it's earned my number 5 spot for 2024. Number 4, quite surprising for me here, is Stalker 2. Surprising mostly because my 45-ish hour first playthrough, I have started the second one. I'm like 5 or 10 hours in. I haven't played it in a bit because I've been busy. But that 45 hour playthrough probably doesn't count the multiple, I assume, hours of progress I lost from bugs and glitches and all kinds of stuff. The experience of playing Stalker 2 on release was a nightmare. It was awful from a technical perspective. But what's so endearing about the game is that the aesthetic, the world they built, the characters in that world, the protagonist you play as, the game is a mix of just absurdity and heart and silliness, and in the world, like the way I expressed it was that Stalker 2 gave me vibes of like Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas for the first time since those games. Even though, Bethesda has released more games since then, and Bethesda and, others. But Fallout 4, a game I love, just didn't, it has some of that feeling that like coming upon weird things and figuring things out, environmental storytelling, random NPCs, things like that. Even Starfield to a point has that, but Stalker 2 to me just really, really captured that feeling of just wandering off into the unknown, and maybe some irradiated bear is going to attack you and kill you, or maybe some poltergeist is going to get you, or these other stalkers are going to try to take your stuff, or these mercenaries, or this military faction, or this cult, or you can run into anything. You go into a building, maybe you're going to run into a poltergeist, which is effectively a ghost. It's actually a mutant that is like invisible until you kill it. I digress. The world is so good, and that really captured me. And then I really got into the story. And like there's a moment late in the game where a character realizes their situation, and the words they say, it like made me tear up. It was so good. And then the ending, the final act of the game is extremely good. And I just really enjoy the moments, and especially the whole story of the game throughout, but especially in the second half, you can tell like, oh man, like those choices I made are legitimately affecting the game right now. Like there is a significantly different second half of this game to play if I do different things in the first half and through the second half. And so just all of that together, like the fact that I have this as my number 4 game of the year is a big deal, because from a technical perspective, it shouldn't even be on the list. It's getting better. They've done tons of updates, they've improved it a lot. I do suggest the game at this point for sure, especially on Game Pass. But like, I really can't, like, if it was in a good technical state on launch, it could have won my game of the year. And it obviously being in the top 5, it was in contention, right? Because despite the bad I was dealing with, and there was a lot of it, again, mostly technical, the good was real good. And so, like, when this game gets fixed up, when it gets patched up, when it's really ready to go, probably here in a few months, it's really going to be a gem to play. And I, to the point where that's what I'm kind of waiting for my second playthrough. I want to play through it much slower, take my time, find all the things, you know, really experience the full game that I didn't really do this time, the first time through, especially when it's, you know, not got a memory leak so bad I have to restart it every hour and things like that. So Stalker 2, I caution, I have a cautionary recommendation for it, but definitely a game worth playing, and one I was really happy that I gave a chance this year. Number 3, Star Wars Outlaws. There's some bias here, a few things to be clear about. I am an Ubisoft creator, whatever thing they have. I haven't used it in months, but to be clear, I did get my copy of Outlaws for free. I actually got to preview it early as well. And I have a pretty close relationship to a few people at the studio who made it. Just throwing that out there. And that does affect my feelings on it. I actually haven't played it recently. They've done a bunch of updates that made it more friendly to people. There's when I played it, there were a bunch of things like fail conditions and a bunch of missions where if you just got seen by the enemy, the mission was over. They've gotten rid of a lot of that, where now you can just blast your way through everything. I think they realized eventually that they were maybe being a little heavy-handed with trying to force people to play the game the way they wanted. And instead they realized eventually, like, you know what, let the kids go blast in. And that's what they've done for the most part. And so it's probably an even better experience now than when I played it. But this was another one of those games where I got into it. I enjoyed the world. I enjoyed finding the little things in the first half or so. And then I got into the story. I got stuck in, and the betrayals and the drama and the discoveries and all that. And it got to the point where, especially at the end, I was really, really, really enjoying it. The whole heist thing, it had some kind of like a Mass Effect feel to it in some ways. Mass Effect 2, you're putting the team together, you're doing all that stuff. I really enjoyed that. The characters, the story, the writing, all of that was great. I think KVS is a really fun protagonist to play as. This was in complement to last year. One of my favorite games was Star Wars Jedi Survivor, another game where I compare these games a lot. I think they're very different ways of, they're very different games. The actual gameplay is obviously very different. Playing a Jedi, playing a scoundrel, having very different paths they're going down and all that. But they had like, I still think they're very, you can compare them in the sense of, you know, the way that the NPCs make you care about them, and that you get into the story and the ups and the downs and all that. I really, really enjoyed it. They're both great platformers in their own ways and things like that. There's still things about Outlaws I wish they would have done a little differently. But I think overall, this being the first big and such a big property to deal in, introducing new characters to the lore and all that. But for a studio who's made the Division 1 and 2 and has kind of focused on other things, even a game like Avatar is very different than what they did here. I think it was a really good first effort of doing the kind of more typical, you know, almost like PlayStation style, third person action adventure, sad dad or sad mom or whatever you want to call Kay, style of game that's very narrative heavy and gameplay fun and all that. Kind of like an Uncharted-ish, but not quite as action packed maybe. I think it was a really good first effort of this type of game, and I hope that they don't stray away from it completely. My genuinely, my true hope is that they take a lot of what they learned from Outlaws and implement it into the Division 3, which should happen because Julian Garrity, who is the lead on Outlaws, is now the lead on the division entirely, but especially Division 3. And much of the team, I believe, from Outlaws is going to be leading the development of the Division 3, because it's the same, mostly the same people who made the Division 2, where the Ubisoft Massive Avatar team has some people from the Division franchise, but is mostly a new team that they had built up over the years. So excited to see what they do in the future. The Division 3 is presumably their next big project, and I'm genuinely really excited to see what they do with that. With my number 2 is Sinuous Saga Hellblade 2. This is a game that I try to be understanding about it. It goes back to my kind of Xbox tax conversation that I briefly mentioned. I get it's frustrating for me because the main knock on Hellblade 2 is that it's short. It took me about 10 hours to get through my first playthrough. I probably left an hour or two of exploration and side stuff on the table. You see people, and I've seen a lot of reviewers, and I'll talk about them plenty here in a little bit during my airing of grievances. But like I saw people being like, "Oh, it's only like a 4-hour game," which is just not true. But I even saw some people being like, "Yeah, I only played my Xbox 6.5 hours this year, and it was just to play Hellblade." And even then, like maybe there's a way you could just skip all dialogue, skip all narrative, which and you could figure out a way to never die. You play on the super easiest mode, whatever. Maybe you could make that happen 6-7 hours, but not if you really play the game. And the whole point of the Hellblade games, especially this one, is to experience the story and the characters and the dialogue and all of that. And if you do that, if you fully embrace it, then it's not that short of a game, 8, 9, 10 plus hours. Not to mention that there are heavy incentives to replay the game, which I've started and need to get back to, just like is the story with many of the games I played this year. But Hellblade Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga is so good. It's extremely good. One of the best stories I played all year, maybe the best, arguably. The best characters in a game I've played all year. And then just like from a tech perspective, like this is the new standard in games. And I've even seen people in recently being saying that Indiana Jones is and stuff. It isn't. Indiana Jones looks amazing. They do have a bunch of tech in there that is really impressive, but Hellblade 2 still is the standard, and it probably will be for a while. Just from animations to the graphical side of things and all the tech they use, they really did go all in on Unreal Engine 5 and tried to be kind of a showcase for that game. It looks so good. The voice acting as well. You get into the audio design, you still have the voices chatting in your ears. You need to play this game with headphones, obviously. You've got Sinua's performance as well as every other person in the game. Their performance is amazing. It's beautiful. It's a good experience. It has good characters and writing. The story's great. Like I got frustrated to the point where I really question how many of the reviewers, because so many of the reviews I saw and heard and read really felt like they were reviewing the first half of the game, which isn't the best. The second half is way better, at least in my opinion. It starts a little slow, even though I still think the story of the first half is good, but I think it accelerates and gets way better in the second half of the game. And I swear, and I don't want to say people lied or whatever, but a lot of the feedback I saw in the reviews and stuff really felt like they only played the first half of the game. And then I see, and I won't mention names, but there was a person who I know reviewed the game live on a podcast who said the whole like, oh yeah, the only 6 hours I played my Xbox this year was playing Senua's Saga. And that's interesting because that person's review 100% sounds like they legit played half the game and then quit and maybe talked to someone or read a summary to get the gist of the second half of the game, so they aren't completely ignorant. But really, there's so many people who really don't feel like they actually finished the game to me. And I think if you played the first half, many of the reviews I saw made sense. But if you played the whole game and really gave it the chance and tried to enjoy it, or didn't even try, you shouldn't have to try to enjoy things, but let yourself enjoy it instead of getting in your head, one thing that I don't think we talk about enough, and I think it's a problem, is that even though these reviewers are NDA'd and stuff like that, they play it fast and loose with talking to each other, especially if they talk to someone who they know is also NDA'd. They're not supposed to talk. I can assure you from my own agreements I've signed, but they do because they know that it's like a mutually assured destruction thing, right? But what I think happens, and it's not just Hellblade, I think it's with all the reviews that we see, is that, and it can be good or bad probably, what happens, it seems, is that they start diving into these games, they play a few hours, and then I can almost guarantee there's discords out there of all of these big reviewers or people who get codes who chat about this stuff. And because we, at least to me, what it seems like is, especially these big name people, it seems like they always come out and have kind of like the same overall narratives about whatever game they're talking about on when the embargo lifts. And it really just reeks to me of people who are obviously chit-chatting for the last week or two while they were playing these games. And this isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing, which with the next game we talk about, I think it was. But like, Hellblade 2 really seemed to be a victim of multiple things that were out of its control. But the big one really seemed to be people just kind of not giving it a chance. And I think that sucks because I thought it was an extremely good game that set a new bar for gaming in many, many ways. And I personally really believe should have been much more in the Game of the Year discussion for a lot of folks. And it wasn't for reasons I think kind of suck. But not for me. My number 2 Game of the Year was Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga. Loved it. My number 1 game this year was Dragon Age The Veilguard. This is really surprising to me. I'm not a 10 out of 10 person on this game. I think I've settled in at like an 8.5 out of 10, so it might not even be my highest ranked game this year, to be totally honest. But I think the overall experience, being biased myself, someone who covers BioWare a lot, is really excited for the next Mass Effect and all of that. I almost think that like some of the reason I have it at number 1 is almost just because I'm just like happy that they did what they did with this, that they, through the tumultuous development, that they were still able to put out a game as good as this one is. Now, it gets the number 1 spot for more reasons than that. I love the characters in this game. I think the graphics, I'm still like 50-50 on the style they went with, kind of the realistic, but still with heavy emphasis on design, you know, putting their own spin on it. The slightly cartoonish, the slightly, not realistic aesthetic, but mixed a little bit with it as well. I think it worked overall. Not my preference, I think, but I still liked it in general. The whole experience is just so good to me. And that still leaves me with things that I was a little underwhelmed by. I think the romances are kind of underwhelming, even though I think most of the NPCs and your companions are great. I really enjoyed a lot of their story arcs. Most of the companion quests I loved. I really, really enjoyed. Harding's was extremely good. I actually like Davrin's a lot, even though I know people are kind of mixed on him. Balara's I thought was really, really great. Even though I really like Nev, I actually kind of didn't care for hers as much. But I just really, really good. I am one of the freaks who doesn't like Emmerich. I don't like I didn't like his companion quest. I don't like his whole vibe. I don't like his design. He's the only design I truly don't like at all. I think that he just looked like a Disney villain to me. I just couldn't get into it. Not my thing. Obviously, the controversial one was Tosh for the most part. Strange. We'll talk about that whole stuff, at the end of the show. Tosh was fine. I just found her to be kind of annoying. But I didn't find her annoying because they wrote her as a non-binary character who's discovering that during the story. Like I think that stuff's fine. That stuff doesn't bother me at all. I just wish it would have been done better. I wish it would have been done better justice. I have no issue at all with them doing a thing where this person who's been expected to hold up these certain stereotypes about who they are and their gender and all that, decides to break from that and explore other things. That's totally fine. I just think the writing for Tosh it sucked for it. It was disrespectful to how cool that character is in most ways. Like I wish they would have just, I like that they did the thing, I just wish they would have done it better. And that's not me turning into one of the grifters who's just pretending to be upset about this, because it unfortunately is the only way to grow as a gaming creator nowadays, it seems. I just, I also didn't care. Like, I experienced some of those things. I kind of went like, okay, whatever, and moved on. I didn't make my entire personality hating that 5 seconds of a game that I really liked. So, but beyond all that stuff, I thought the actual gameplay of Veilguard was so good. I really enjoyed the combat systems, and I on my second playthrough, I've already started, just like I've said multiple times already. I'm trying a completely different type of combat, a different character and class and all that. But I really thought that overall that was great. I enjoyed the way that you get to control your companions, but it doesn't put too much on you. I again, graphically, I thought the game looked really great, especially the environments, especially the lighting as well was so good. For me, this was a very reassuring thing for BioWare. While Dragon Age isn't my favorite franchise, I'm not going back and playing the old ones. 1 and 2 are too old. I know I won't enjoy those. Inquisition, I've played like 20 hours of, and I don't like Inquisition. I think it's kind of a bad game for me, for my preferences. But I really like Dragon Age the Veilguard. It's not turning me into a Dragon Age head. I'm not even, like I said before, giving it like a 10 out of 10. It was just probably my favorite overall experience in general. It also ran really well. I had very few, if any, bugs throughout my entire playthrough, which was pretty long. It just seems like it was well made, and that made me really excited, because it seems like instead of EA forcing BioWare to get this out the door too early, because it was expected to come out a whole year earlier at one point, supposedly, it just seems like this was a good reset for BioWare. It sounds like it sold pretty well, despite what you've heard from the weirdos. It seems like just in general, this was a success. It's not going to sell 50 million copies. It's not going to be the biggest game of the year. It didn't even get, that many awards and stuff, even though I think it should have gotten more attention there. But overall, I feel really good about having Dragon Age as my number one game of 2024 for all the reasons I've said before, and probably some I'm forgetting. But I thought this was a good year, man, and I kind of want to talk about that in the other stories. So I will say, if you have your own game of the year list, or if you want to talk about your favorite game this year and you're on YouTube, leave it down in the comments. I'd be curious to see what that was. Or if you want to hit me up on social media or in my Discord, you can find links for all of that stuff, and let me know what your favorite game was this year. Moving into some other stories, we have just my thoughts on gaming in 2024. So on releases, I thought it was really strange. I saw people kind of being like, "Oh, this was kind of a down year," and I guess if you compare it to 2023, which just Baldur's Gate 3 itself, not to mention the other 3 dozen games that came out that were great. Just Baldur's Gate coming out and being probably one of the best games ever made 2023 pretty hard to beat. But I think 2024 was almost as good, if not just as good, in different ways, right? And for me, the 10 games I listed, there's 5 or 10 more games I could list that came out this year that I at least enjoyed. Or I don't even have 4 of the 5 nominated Game of the Years on my list. Metaphor Refantasio, Astrobot, a bunch of those games, the Elden Ring DLC, and those games are all great. I tried Metaphor Refantasio, and I couldn't stand that game. I am not into the weeb stuff. I don't really like turn-based fighting, stuff like that, even though I just said Baldur's Gate is one of the best games ever, if not the best. I could tolerate it because everything else is so good. Metaphor is just not my style. The Persona games, all that. I don't like the art styles. I can't stand the voices. It's just not my thing. And that's okay. Please don't crucify me over that. I do respect the greatness. Final Fantasy Rebirth, there were a lot of really good games this year. And I didn't play a bunch of them. And I recognize that. That's why I tried to do my disclaimer. But if you look at all the releases, this was a really, really, really good year for gaming. So I'm happy about that. With news and the way the gaming community reacted, and the game industry, especially the games media industry reacted to that news, was up and down. as someone who's an Xbox fan and follows their stuff pretty closely, it was a frustrating year. And for me, not because of Xbox. I I don't know if I love what they're doing with, going, de-emphasizing console sales, emphasizing play everywhere, all that stuff. There's the personal Xbot side of me that doesn't, still want to be like, no, they need to make the console and beat PlayStation. Who's, that side of me who's dumb and ignorant and doesn't recognize the way things are in the way things are going. But then the more analytical side of me, that's like, what they're doing is probably the right choice. They're probably doing the right thing by getting away from the like, because PlayStation is still obsessed with console sales and it's working for them. Good for them. I don't think it's viable in the long term, but I'm probably wrong. And I think what Xbox is doing is pretty smart, but it's leading to some growing pains, right? Like it's not, and what sucks, and this happens in the gaming world all the time, and really just in the world all the time, is that like something happens, uh, some people genuinely like it, most people don't care, and then some people really hate it. And what sucks is that just with the way social media works, and we'll get into this in my final part of this podcast, is that the people who really like it may even talk about it a lot and no one really cares because it's just not as exciting to hear people talk about things they love. The people who don't care just don't care. They don't talk about it. They already have an Xbox or they don't, whatever. Not a big deal to them. The vast majority of people fall into that category. But the people who really hate something, or at least pretend like they really hate something, man, those voices get loud. There may not be many of them. And the people who support them, it may not really account for that many. But man, that negative force really gets loud. And I think that's what happened in gaming news in general this year a lot, where, news came out or rumors came out or speculation came out that either were received in a really weird way because it shouldn't have been a big deal, or they were only news at all because of, this really awful part of the gaming community and this like kind of vocal minority that you would call them. But we'll talk about those more in a little bit. The industry trends in general, where it seems like, the tippy top live service games are still rolling on and doing their thing. But all of these companies, including PlayStation, who have like tried to get into the live service game are failing miserably because it's the haves, the people who are like established live service, and then everyone else is the have-nots. And we've seen it like with PlayStation strategy, it's probably hurt that company quite a bit that they really went all in on live service a few years ago. And now most of those games have come out and failed or been canceled, like Concord, have gotten canceled before they even came out, like the Last of Us multiplayer game that was supposedly going to be in this live service area, and then games that still aren't out. But there's people are kind of looking around, being like, is there going to be demand for this, whether it's PlayStation or others? Like Arc Raiders is a game that's probably going to come out next year. And I've gotten to play it. I can't really talk much about it, but it's a type of game that is, I think it's going to be really cool. And it's going to have all of the makings of a successful live service game. But is anyone going to play it? Is anyone going to care? And that's, with the industry trends, seeing that happen has been interesting because even all these publishers and developers are still seeing like, oh, Fortnite's still killing it. Warzone's doing great. Whatever else, other games, right? But then there's just no more room for those games, right? For more of them, or at least not yet. As for the future, I mean, obviously the Xbox thing I think is interesting to see, how they develop, as they, put out likely a handheld in the next few years, as they put out a next generation of console in the next few years, as we have these rumors of them, collaborating with third-party hardware developers that could make their own Xboxes or basically PCs with the Xbox OS on it. Maybe something that would dual boot. That'd be super cool. Xbox, is moving towards this future that they think is going to happen. And I think they're probably right, but we'll have to wait and see. We have, PlayStation doing what they've always done. And at least so far that working out pretty well for them. We have a new console coming from Nintendo next year, which is going to be wild, and they'll keep doing their own thing and selling 100 million plus consoles. So good for them. I'll be one of them. We have the PC market, which is just getting more and more expensive, but is also getting more and more powerful and impressive. I think the future is interesting. I think we see things like Ubisoft being in what seems to be pretty significant trouble when it comes to their situation, whether they're going to get bought out or split up or whatever's going to happen with them. We have the Embracer Group still embracing, and as far as I know, still not releasing any games, even though they have like 50 studios under their wings. We have EA, who seems to be kind of like making somewhat of a renaissance of themselves with single player games and all that, with more of those expected in the next year, and hopefully development of the next Mass Effect game getting a little more attention starting in 2025. And then we have me, and we'll talk about that here at the end of the show. As for my community, they thought they were going to be in the area of grievances. They are not. I really do appreciate everyone. It's a small, tight-knit group. I am not a creator who's really trying to make this my full-time gig or really explode. I won't say I'm like happy with where I'm at. I do want to keep growing and bringing new people into the fold and all of that, which, mentioning that, we could really use some new people in Discord. It's the same like 10 of us that are always arguing in there. So if you check out my content, whether it's podcasts or on YouTube and stuff like that, come join up. You don't even have to talk. You can just lurk, but just be around. It'd be nice to see more people in there who aren't bots, and fake people trying to sell me stuff. But I really do appreciate, whether it's the, handful of people who I talk to a lot in the Discord and in other places, or if it's the, hundreds and maybe a few thousands of people who over the year watch my videos and check them out and follow me on, or subscribe to me on YouTube and Twitch and stuff like that. It's really nice. This is not my full-time job. I have a full-time job. I have a family. I have other stuff that I do. But this is, my main hobby, and this is the thing I really enjoy. I like making this podcast. I like making videos. I like streaming here and there, which I do hope to do more of. I like talking about games. I like paying attention to games. It's a nice retreat from the real world, and it's been good. So to everyone who's listening to this, whether it's now or later, you are part of the community, whether you like it or not, and I really appreciate you being around. Okay, so with that nice stuff, let's get into the airing of grievances. I, at one point, was going to make this a big, giant rant, but instead, I'll try to be fairly succinct. But I want to start a new tradition of doing my game of the year, reflecting on the year, and then griping about some people and groups and stuff that has like made me mad this year. So let's start off with gaming content creators and influencers. Let's start off with the console warriors. These people suck, even if they like Xbox. The Game Pass Tim or whatever this year, at the beginning of the year, we had a situation where the rumors about Xbox starting to put more of their games in more places started coming out. And man, again, it goes back to that whole thing of some people like the idea. Most people just don't care or are neutral on it. And then a small number of people were real mad about it because they're still stuck in that that mindset of like, we're the next Xbox is going to be the one that outsells, hardware, that outsells PlayStation and Nintendo, and we're gonna have the right killer set of games and blah blah blah, which is just stupid. That's not gonna happen. It's never gonna happen. Never again. Or never ever. It's never happened, really. And so these people drove me the craziest this year, I think, of it's any of the Xbox, or not Xbox, just platform specific super fans at all, because they all suck. Every single one of them sucks. They're all awful. And I think what's most frustrating about it is that I don't believe that the vast majority of them are serious. I think that you can get in, and this happens with games too, where you can get so entwined in this one platform or game or community or whatever that that's your meal ticket, and that whether you truly feel the way you feel or that you express yourself or not, you have to. So you see these Twitter accounts or these YouTube accounts or whatever, and all they do is make these like crappy arguments or basically lie or highly manipulate information or rumors or speculation that comes out about the other team's box. And then they'll make these videos or make these posts on Twitter that get way too big and way too much attention. saying this thing that is pretty obviously not true. And then you have the people who like that platform way too much. Again, saying this is someone who loves Xbox and would consider myself like an Xbox fan, but also realizes Xbox like isn't like, I don't care. Like if they shut down tomorrow, I'd be like, oh, that sucks. And then I'd get over it. Where some of these people would like jump off the earth. But you have these people who will make these posts about any of the platforms or about any of the other platforms that get people all riled up. And then those people get riled up and they suck too. You know, they're the worst as well. And then they just go back and forth. And it's like this economy of attention, right? We're like, and I still think most of them are full of crap. That they don't really believe the things they say. They make things up or sensationalize or editorialize or whatever on purpose. Because they're just little weirdos who are making a little bit of money on YouTube or Twitter or whatever. And these people suck because even though the majority of people are kind of neutral or don't care about this stuff, you know, these really loud people, their voices still get out there. And so even if like the neutral folks don't get into the silliness, they'll still hear bits and pieces of it and be like, wait, they're really not making Xboxes anymore? And like, it's just like a source of misinformation and stuff like that. And it sucks. And I think these people are just like a net negative on the gaming community in general. And this is console warriors specifically. I feel the same way about the clickbaiters, the bad faith people. And God, especially in the last year, it's been going on for years, but especially in this last year or two, the like culture rage baiting people, you know, who are complaining about anything that's woke, which if you actually know what woke means, it's the dumbest thing to be mad about. It's literally the kindest thing you can, it's the most reasonable thing a human can be is woke. Even though no one who is woke even says that word anymore. Only the weirdos say it who hate it. Or the DEI stuff or whatever the scary word of the week is, right? The people who have really focused in on that, and it's really not that many people. It's like a dozen people who actually get like crazy numbers talking about this stuff, and then a bunch of losers who try and fail, which is the most pathetic thing, because it's so easy to do the bait content, right? And you see it. You can see the numbers. You can see whether it's on social media or on, you know, YouTube or Twitch or whatever. You see how successful it is for a fairly small number of people to just be these incendiary, ignorant, complete pieces of crap. And they suck in their own way, right? Because they make everything worse. Like literally, they've made everything worse. Whether it's harassing devs or stirring people up or just lying about stuff or whatever. But what's even almost worse or more pathetic, I guess, are the people who try to do that kind of content and are still like the size of me with a couple thousand Twitch or a couple thousand followers on Twitch or a couple thousand subscribers on YouTube, you know, maybe a couple dozen, a couple hundred, maybe sometimes 1,000 or 2,000 views on a video. Doing the same thing I'm doing, which isn't that kind of content, just boring content like what you're listening to right now. But the people who are doing the bait stuff and still are only as big as me or smaller always make me laugh because it's like, that sucks because that's the easiest stuff in the world to do. You don't even need a brain. If you see some of the people who have gotten big doing this stuff and you hear them talk, whenever they aren't just parroting whatever line that they've heard from everyone else, when actually these people actually try to speak intelligently, they all fail miserably because they're dumb. These people don't have those beliefs, or they aren't okay with these crappy ideas because they're smart. They're dumb. Now maybe a few of them are smart and they're just grifting. They still suck though, so we'll put them in the same category. But yeah, the clickbaiters, the culture rage people, all that, the worst. And then I have to call out something that's I've been dealing with for years, and it's this like the like insincere like fellow creators. Now this is something fairly personal to me, where, you know, since I started making the Division 1 content, you get into this fairly small community of people who cover news, speculation, whatever, rumors, all that stuff. And it happened with me with the Division 2, and it's happened to me since, and even, you know, even today, where, you know, you find these fellow creators, say, oh, hey, yeah, you share their video on Twitter, they share yours, you know, they comment on your videos, or you comment on theirs, or whatever. And then, maybe they see that you aren't growing very quickly and you're no longer of use to them, or maybe you dare to disagree with them on something, and they have no use for you anymore, or whatever the case is. This was a big gripe for me this year because it happened multiple times, and it's been happening to me since I started. And so every now and then people will ask, like, why don't you ever collaborate more on videos? Why don't you have more people on your podcast? Why don't you do all these other things? It's because I've been burned so many times. And it sucks. And especially as someone who's doing this as a hobbyist who doesn't have all day, every day to try to plan these things and do these things, who isn't willing to do insincere collaborations with people who I know suck, but because this is my full-time job or my full-time gig, I have to do this kind of stuff because it's the only way for it to work. I don't have to do that stuff. I only have to interact with people I want to. And that's because I'm not growing. I'm not trying to make this my full-time job. And it's the best part of the way I do it. But it still sucks because I still do want connections. I still do want to collaborate. I still want to have people I can talk to about the trials and tribulations or ideas I have for content. But outside of a very extremely minuscule number of people, I don't have that. The number of people who I thought I had that with and definitely and ended up not, compared to the people I do and have for a long time, are very different numbers, and that really sucks. And that's why it's part of my airing of grievances for this year. The other section is gaming journalists. Now I got to talk about them. If you're around enough, you've heard me moan and groan about this enough to the point where it's probably annoying, probably not helping myself on social media and stuff by calling some of these people out specifically, like to their own accounts. But while I can't stand the content creators, the influencers who do all the basically just lies and all that, they have no expectation of credibility or integrity. So while it's still annoying, it's whatever. It sucks that people are media illiterate and don't realize that these people aren't believable because they have no reason to be, really, other than their own profit. But the journalism side of it has really annoyed me. And it's been really sad this year, especially for me, because like Xbox is the best example. They're trying these new things. There's these rumors coming out, and it's these journalists, people who work for publications. It should be their job to verify, to explain, to talk about without as much bias as possible. And there is almost none of that happening today. And I've said to the point where, and some of them got fired from IGN recently and have lost their jobs in other places. My issue is that I think the only game journalist left is Jason Schreier. And he even has his own biases and stuff for sure. But about the only journalist I feel like we can count on to get reports about, these well-researched, credited and, these stories, they're probably pretty good. They're probably legit if it comes from him. And there's no one else. Because most game journalists now, I'd say almost all of them, are closer to these content creators I was talking about than they are actual journalists. And that's because, from at least what I've noticed, most of them aren't journalists. They didn't go to school. They have no experience. They don't know how to be journalists. So they're basically just content creators with a WordPad and a bigger platform because they're attached to IGN or GameSpot or whatever. But they don't have any more credibility or integrity than even some of the people who are known for having like leaks and stuff, like Jeff Grubb and others. Like he's one of the most biased people that's in the game media, games media, that's considered a journalist by a lot of people. But especially since he went to Giant Bomb, like I think that's kind of hard to support. I don't think he is a journalist anymore. I think he's an influencer, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the lack of distinction, either in the way that they handle themselves or by the people who pay attention to them, it sucks because people will see some hot take about a game and I think it's news, and it's not. It's just that person's opinion, and that person's just a person, and they may even have biases that have led them to that hot take, that make it just not true, or make it unlikely. But because they have this label, they have this credibility of being a journalist, it gets reported on and it gets talked about and it gets believed. And that's been really frustrating this year, and that's really sucked. The other part of it that's been really frustrating this year is how much bait the journalists do now, whether it's in their articles or in their personal interactions, in ways of obviously just posting things and it's skewing stories. Every time there's an Xbox story, it's the confusing strategy that Xbox is taking, the dire circumstance that Xbox is in, even though all indications are they're extremely healthy, as for, their company is very healthy financially and things. But I think the worst thing for me has been how, especially with this Xbox stuff, but it happens in other places too in gaming, where these journalists will, be these relatively intelligent people who seem to understand the industry maybe more so than the regular person and all that. And then Xbox will, potentially share their OS with other hardware. And all of a sudden, these journalists' brains just shut down and the drool starts coming from their mouths. And basically, anytime, for example, Xbox does something that PlayStation isn't doing, all of a sudden, they just can't fathom why this is happening. And it's just like that stuff has just driven me so crazy. And I'm sure it's not Xbox specific. I'm sure, people are doing this with all the other platforms and all that. For me, because of the things I pay attention to, I see it the most there. And it's so frustrating because I know that person is smart. And I know that person could write an article being like, here's what Xbox is trying to do. Here's how it could work. Here's how it could fail. And here's what I think about it. But it's never that. It's always just, here's what Xbox is doing in the most dramatic way possible. And here's what I think. There's so little actual reporting happening. There's so little journalism happening now. An article like that where they say, here's what Xbox is trying. Here's how it could work. Here's how it could fail. Here's a quote from Phil Spencer that we reached out to him. Here's a quote from, Cerny from PlayStation and this other expert or this former Xbox executive or whatever. It's never that. It's always just hot take headline, hot take in the article. Very little, if any, research being done. Very little, if any, factual information being provided. Just, here's my hot take. There's a hot take. Here's my 15th article I've written today. Good luck. We're ruining everything. Moving on to my final grievance for this year. Dragon's Dogma 2 is the worst game I've ever played. That game sucks so bad. And when I saw it on multiple nominations, I've seen some people propose Dragon's Dogma 2 as a game of the year. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. That is the worst game I've ever played. And I've played some bad games. I've played Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Okay? Dragon's Dogma 2, and I hate Dragon's Dogma 2 especially because the first 2 or 3 hours, I was like, oh my God, this might be my game of the year. This is amazing. This combat's fun, looks okay, kind of. And then I went down the story path. And then I found out you could romance. But kind of. And then this, and then that. And then I fast traveled. And for the 5,000th time in a row, my fast travel got stopped in the middle. And then Orc fought us because they always do, because there's no traveling without it. And then it broke my wagon. And now I have to walk the rest of the way, even though I paid for it. Dragon's Dogma 2 is so frustrating because for the first couple hours, I thought it was game of the year for me. It was early. I'm sure I would have. Even if it stayed good, I probably would have changed my mind. But as the game goes on, to me, it is the most unfinished. Nothing's finished in Dragon's Dogma 2. Even today. Still runs like crap. Still doesn't look great. You still fight the same 12 enemies the entire 40, 50 hours that you play it. The companions, everything's unfinished. There's technically romances, even though you can romance everyone that you meet, basically, if you give them stuff. And there's a couple characters where there's scenes for it, but they're awful. I hate Dragon's Dogma 2 so much. And it's so frustrating. And it sucks because it's one of the best examples for me of a game that wow, this had so much potential. But because it didn't even reach 10% of that potential, I hate it. I played the first few hours, loved it. I played 30 plus hours of that game. I'm pretty sure I'm within a couple hours of finishing it. I'll never play it again because I just couldn't. Because it got to the point where the only way I could progress in the game or can feel like I was doing anything productive was to just cheese it, was to just run through these areas with all the same enemies I've been fighting the whole game, was to basically abuse the fast travel system in some capacity. Was it just it felt like a game from 20 years ago with a few things that made it seem modern. It just seems like the first game again, but like kind of worse in a lot of ways. I just Dragon's Dogma 2 sucks, man. And that will conclude my 2024 airing of grievances, and because I'm getting pretty long in the tooth here. As for content updates, as we wrap up this show, 2025 plans. I'm working on trying to figure out how, with this podcast specifically and my Mass Effect one, to guzzy it up a little bit with, editing, transitions, trying to maybe get some new sound effects and stuff like that to break the show up more effectively, so it's not just me rambling for 30 minutes to an hour every week. I do want to do some interviews and maybe do some co-hosting. This is going to be pretty dependent on games that I care about having, news, Mass Effect specifically, but having people on, maybe do a little more collaboration. But as I said before, that gets harder and harder as fewer and fewer people seem like sincere collaborators. So we'll have to see what happens with that. And trying to focus on reaching out and getting new people. It's the podcast thing in general is impossible, and the gaming podcast market is so hard because there's 1,000 shows. There's 1,000 shows. There's hundreds of new ones every day. It's hard to get noticed. Like, that's why even the relatively small numbers I have are amazing in my opinion, and when I see the stats and then I look them up and stuff, even my like middling podcast that gets a relatively small number of people who listen to it every week is in like the top like 2 or 3% of podcast. Which means there's literally like millions of podcasts out there that get posted every week or every month that just no one listens to. No one hears the words. If my podcast ranks where it does when I see the stats, that means that there's literally hundreds of thousands and probably millions of podcasts out there that don't get a single person who listens to them. And then it's hard to move up. The game industry is hard, especially the game coverage industry. It's the notable people, it's a small team, and they don't want you on it. They don't want you in because you are taking time and money and attention out of their pot, right? So, but I do want to keep trying to figure out better ways to bring people in. And like I said before, if you're part of the community, if you've been listening to my podcast, if you watch my videos, if you do all the things and you want to come chat, I'm always happy to. The Discord is a fun, nice little place. I don't tolerate any of the bull crap. I'm actually quite a dictator on there. It's fine if you disagree with me. I don't care about that stuff. But people who are rude, bots, all that stuff, it all gets cut out. There's literally like a dozen people that we chat with a lot. So if you want to go get to have actual game discussions and stuff, check out the Discord. It should be in the Linktree link that you should find down in the description. And that's where I'm going to wrap it up. It's been a good 2024. I'm really excited about 2025. If you have your own topics, questions, or feedback for the podcast, be sure to let me know. This is a good time to do it as I'm trying to change things up. You can let me know in my Discord, in the YouTube comments, or you can hit me up on social media. I am at Bondiesel or at the Baunfire on basically everything. That is all I have for this episode and the final one of 2024 of the Baunfire Gaming podcast. Thank you so much for listening on this one and all year. Until next time.